Okay, so my guest today is Dr. Kerry Palmer. Kerry has been in education his entire adult life. He's worked as an educator and an administrator at every level of education for the last almost 30 years. He has a PhD from Auburn University in adult education, and he's currently the Dean of the College of Education at Troy University. And last but not least, he's also my older brother. Dr. Kerry Palmer, thank you for joining me today for this chat.
Yeah, thank you, Kevin. It's good to be with you.
Thank you. So your story is a inspiring story to me. I lived it with you growing up. We grew up in the same house, so I kind of lived it. But when I meet someone that has a PhD, I normally think this person, I have trouble identifying with them because I just imagine that they made straight A's all through school. They never had a problem. Everything was just really easy for them, which it wasn't for me. And so I don't feel like I identify with them, but your story is different than that. And it's an inspiring story. So can you kind of talk about, as an educator, you're an educator now, but someone who also came up through the education system when you were younger, what that was like for you?
Yeah, I'd be delighted to. And the first thing I've discovered about, I have a PhD, but I'm a university dean, college dean in a university. And one thing I've learned about PhDs is they don't always correlate with a load of common sense, if you will. And I don't think that the person with the PhD is necessarily any smarter than anyone else. I think you certainly have to have some level of academic ability to earn a PhD, but I think what the PhD probably measures more than anything is perseverance and staying the course and sticking something out. You talk about education, and just to put things into context, you and I were born in the 1970s. I was born in 1971. And so education has changed a lot since that time. And we know so much more today about how young people learn. And we know that there's many different ways that people learn. And that just wasn't really known. The research just wasn't done. It wasn't there. Public education is like an assembly line, and they put students on the assembly line. They group them. And I always said in public education and in private education, for the most part, we group students based upon their date of manufacture. I was manufactured in August of 1971. Therefore, the public education system thought that I should be at a certain developmental level at these various ages. We just know now that's just not how that works. People develop at different rates. So today, some of the struggles I had academically today, academically in the late 70s and most of the, into the mid 1980s. I just really don't know how they would be approached today. If I headed a private school. I was the head of a school at a private school, very, very good school, high quality education, and we provided help for students with learning issues, but we never told them they had learning issues, and it made a huge difference. So I think the point that you refer to, what you're told, and kind of go into my story. I had a lot of problem with math, and has really struggled with it. And looking back on it now, I don't know, but what a lot of that struggle just came from the fact that I didn't like it very much. I didn't want to do it.
Didn't want to do it, right?
I hadn't understood that there are things in life we just have to do whether we like them or not. And I did struggle. I don't think that side of my brain was I was very right-brained, very artistic, very creative, and that left side of the brain, But as soon as I began to have trouble, by about the second grade, I was identified as having a learning disability in math, and pulled out of the classroom every day and sent to a resource room for instruction by some wonderful teachers. The learning disabilities resource teachers were great, but it never, ever, ever felt good. Get up and walk out of that classroom when it was time for the other students to do math. And so you have to wonder how much of my problem in math was just a self-fulfilling prophecy. You get up and go to the learning disabilities class and you think, well, I must be, as I would have said at that age, I must be dumb in math.
Right. And that's what intrigues me. And that's really what I wanted to ask you. Because I don't think we've ever had a real in-depth conversation about this. But what I have discovered recently is what you were alluding to, is like the power that what we believe about ourselves, what that how that plays out in our life, what we believe. And I was curious if you getting taken out and having to go to this thing, if it made you, like you said, kind of believe, well, they say it's true, it must be true. And at some point you changed that belief changed for you. And I'm curious if when that was, or if you have any memory of when that started to
Yeah,
change for you.
I can remember I wanted to get a master's degree so that I could become a principal, but I was scared to death to take a statistics class. I didn't even know if a statistics class was required, but I just assumed it probably was. And I can remember
Sure.
talking to my next door neighbor, just telling him I'm just scared to death. I don't think I can do this. And he said, well, you won't know unless you try. Just apply and take some classes, and no harm, no foul if it doesn't work. Statistics wasn't required, so I got the degree. And but I will tell you, when I began to look at doctoral programs, and I think this goes to show that what we implant in a student's mind when they're a child is it's like pressing an impression into wet cement.
Wow.
And that cement dries, and it is very, very difficult to change it. I still
Wow.
felt, and I went to Auburn, gosh, in 2016. So I was probably 45 years old, much older than my classmates when I enrolled in
Right.
my
You were the old
PhD.
man. You were the old man in the class.
That's right. And when I first started looking, I didn't even consider Auburn. I didn't consider Auburn. I didn't consider Alabama. I didn't consider Florida, Florida State, Georgia. I didn't think I could get in. And so I didn't even apply. And I ended up looking at a lot of schools and actually began work at an institution that was sort of an online type of thing. And one of my colleagues at the school where I was the head came to me one day, and she said, I know you don't think you can get into Auburn. And I don't, undergraduate, I guess it is in graduate school. It's not very easy to get into Auburn
Not at
University.
all.
You have to have about a 28 ACT to get in there as a freshman, and they limit the number of people they take. It's a very fine school. I didn't think there was a prayer of me getting into Auburn, and that's even with I graduated from Auburn Montgomery with a 3.9. So by this point, you would think I would have a pretty
Yeah, that's
pretty
interesting.
good. Yeah,
That's
3.9
interesting
grade
because I would figure that getting that 3.9 would have changed your belief. But as you said, if you didn't have to take math, so you still had this lingering doubt
I
about
did.
what you were capable of.
I did, and I just thought there's just no way this big R1 designation, that's the highest designation a university can have. It's the highest level of research output. Well, I had an interview with the gentleman that ran the program, and he told me, he said, "Look, you're running the school, and it's the number 13 feeder school for Auburn University. I mean, you send us
Yeah.
45 students a year, and you've been there successfully for all these years." He said, "Why would we not accept you into our PhD program?
Right.
You're the first student we want." So I got in there, but I will tell you, it finally can't. You can't get a PhD without statistics. You gotta have
It
about
came
four of
around,
those
didn't it?
classes. You can't get around it. And I remember going into the most advanced stats class that I would take, and it was called Design and Analysis. And there was a gentleman teaching it named Hank Murrah.
Okay.
And I don't mind using Dr. Murrah's name because I have a lot of respect and admiration for him. Oh, he was just a marvelous teacher. He really was. And I made a B in his class, which for me was just, I made a B.
Yeah.
It's advanced statistics at Auburn University.
That's something
I
else.
was proud of that.
Yeah.
When I sat down in that class, and I didn't do an online doctorate. I did brick and mortar. I drove over to Auburn and walked across
Right.
campus, went into the building and sat down with everyone else. I was much older than most of the students, not all of them. There were a lot of international students in there, particularly from India in my class, who were majoring in some psychological field or whatever. This is a behavioral science stats class, and a
Okay.
lot of young students who just graduated with their master's degrees. for their bachelor's degrees. And I just looked around that room, and to that very day, as a 45, 46-year-old man, I thought, I absolutely do not belong here.
Oh,
And
wow.
so it is hard to overcome that. It really is. And the only thing I knew to do was just get in there and try.
Right.
And I would finish class, drive home, which took me about an hour to get home. And I would sit down in my little study at home and open up the computer and find YouTube videos on the concepts we discussed in class that day. And I just essentially went to class again. I mean, I was
Yeah.
just dedicated to it. And I've come to realize, and you've mentioned this some in your newsletter, but we know today about neuroplasticity. I mean, we know that the brain can change. It can continue to change. You can really, there's really not many limits to what you can do if you're willing to
Right.
put the work in. But what you referred to about a person being told, something about themselves, or they're treated a certain way, is known as the Pygmalion effect. And it comes from there was a study that was done back, I think it was in the 1960s. And they took students and just randomly assigned them to two or three different elementary school classrooms, and then went and told one of the teachers, listen, we got the best and brightest students in school. I mean, and this is just a random sampling. That
Right.
teacher approached the teaching of those students with the belief that they would be successful, and they were. Their grades and everything were way better than anyone ever expected. And I think it's important. So I guess it's important for me to say this as an educator and as a dean of a college that turns out a lot of school teachers and everything. It's very easy to blame school teachers,
Sure.
and principals, and there are times that there are poor teachers in classrooms and poor principals in classrooms, but generally speaking, you can't know about this unless research has been conducted and
Right.
reported on, and then it's up to us when we teach people go and become school teachers to understand that the way you treat the student is very, very important.
Yeah. It leaves a lasting impression. I remember, and I'm sure you remember this too, when we were in school, the classrooms were sectioned out into 3 different sections into your reading level. And there was the low reading group, and then there was the middle, and then there was the high. And then on top of that, some kids were deemed gifted.
Yep.
And they would come and take those kids from class, and these were considered the gifted kids. And I remember seeing those kids leaving and just thinking that I guess I'm not gifted, but those little things start to plant seeds, which is what intrigues me, because getting back to something you said before, kind of what we've seen when you really dig deep into this is that we're all afraid of failing. Like, you were afraid to apply because we don't want to fail. But what we've seen is that for the most part, failing is it's not the end. It's about getting back up. And if you're willing, it's like, you said the PhD is it's basically who can stand it the longest, right? Who can just keep going and keep going and keep going and keep going.
Yeah.
And there's so much truth to that. I've heard so many stories about just the ability to stand back up and keep going, what you can accomplish if you stand back up and just keep going, and how much failure is a part of it. And if we don't believe we can do something the first time we fail, we think it's evidence that was true. Yeah.
Yeah. And the older we get, it's almost like we default, we're like water that runs to the lowest place, right? I mean, we default to the place that we're most comfortable. And there are things that all of us do very well. I mean, I was a music teacher, band director for years. I directed a church orchestra for 20 years.
Right.
If you hand me I played in our little community band here in Troy, and Monday night, the director just handed me the baton and said, come up here and conduct this piece. And I'm perfectly comfortable doing that. I do an awful lot of public speaking. I'm perfectly comfortable doing that. I had a friend want me to go out and play golf with him one day. And I got out there and started trying to hit that ball around. And I thought, man, it's been a long time since I've done something that I wasn't comfortable doing.
Yeah.
This isn't pleasant. I'm accustomed to kind of going into my strength zone, but I do think it's very good for the brain. And I think it's good for us to step into discomfort and step into areas where we may fail, but it's in failing that you learn.
Right.
And I can remember I was a junior high school band director or middle school band director for many years, and I enjoyed teaching that age group. But if you create a safe space for that student to give something a shot and mess up and try again, they'll be very, very successful. If you shut them down the first time they fail at it, you won't be able to get anything out of them. They're just young enough to give it a go, give it
Yeah.
a really good go.
And really
But you
what you're
can't
doing is,
encourage that.
right, you're instilling a belief.
Yeah.
Isn't that what you're doing? You're instilling a belief that you can do it. I've shared a study a while back that a teacher that was had students write an essay, and she graded half the class and gave normal feedback, and the other class she just included one extra sentence, and the extra sentence just said, "I'm giving you this feedback because I believe in you." And those students a year later were doing so much better, and it's just because they thought that teacher saw something in them, and it changed what they believed. So that's a huge thing. That kind of
Well, I
stuff
heard,
really lights me up.
yeah, we had a speaker here at Troy this week, last Friday night. But this gentleman went to the same high school you and I went to, and he went there right at the time it was integrating, and he had been a poor student all the way up to his senior year. And this legendary teacher at Lee High School back in the 50s and 60s and 70s, a lady named Gladys Nichols, told him that he was actually a very good writer if he would just apply himself. And today he is on 5 or 6 different corporate boards of directors. And on a corporate board of directors, you get paid to be on that board, and you get transported to the meetings on a private jet. He was the marketing director for Coca-Cola.
Wow.
He sat on the board of the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta, and last Friday night gave probably one of the top 2 or 3 most inspirational speeches I've ever heard, because it came from, he said, this lady was the first person in my life ever told me how to mount to anything.
Wow.
And,
There's such power in it. Yeah, there's real power in that. Yeah.
There is. And you and I had an advantage. I mean, I think this is an important thing too. We had an advantage of our parents. My parents believed in me. I think they've always believed in me. I think they've always believed in you. I don't think there's ever been, no matter what we've done or how we've struggled, they've never, ever not.
Right.
And they've never failed to tell us that.
Yeah.
But one of the moments in my life that I'll never forget, you mentioned it when you texted me about doing this interview today, was for some reason, Mom and I were in a guidance counselor's office, and I can't even remember who the counselor was. We had 10 or 12 of them, it seemed, at high school, but it was a large high school. But I remember her telling my mother, said, we're going to get Kerry into a good vocational school. And how Mom can be, she
wasn't having that.
She bowed up and put that finger in there and just told that lady he's going to college. I'm like, oh, okay.
Yeah. And
Well,
the guidance, do you feel like or think that the guidance counselor thought that because you had been labeled as a learning disability in math?
I think so. And this was before I took the ACT. When I took the ACT, everything changed because the math score was fairly low. I mean, that's not surprising. I made a 23 on the ACT. But my reading and my language and all was like 30, 31, 32. Well, you make a 30, 31, 32 on the ACT, you generally don't have to pay to go to college. It's
right.
What we realized at that point in time, and this is, I don't want to question, I guess, decisions made. I think people back then in my situation made the best decisions that they knew how to make with the information they had at the time. I have to do that in my job, so I respect that. But it's difficult for me to believe that somebody that can make a 32 on the English portion of an ACT has a learning disability.
Right.
I think that person maybe didn't catch on to math and got a little behind and never caught up, but it's really tough.
Yeah. Well, it's what's interesting you say that. Stevenson, when we adopted him from Haiti in the orphanage, one of the things about him that everyone was so blown away by was that he could tie shoelaces at like 3 years old, 3.5 years old, or something like that. He was tying everyone's shoelaces, and people were just like, "Hey, he can tie shoelaces," and I didn't know when kids were supposed to tie shoelaces, so I looked it up, and it's kind of the same thing. Some kids don't learn to tie shoelaces until they're 7 or 8 years old. But what they discovered was it doesn't have any. It doesn't matter when you learn to tie shoelaces. Some people can just get the motor skills a little bit earlier, and some people a little bit longer. But it's no reflection on your intelligence level, how you're going to turn out. And there are just sometimes, I think, now learning disabilities are a real thing for sure.
Oh, yes,
But
no doubt
but
about it.
I think there are some times that you just, if you're making progress, you're a little behind, you keep catching up. Stevenson's had to catch up in English, and he's kind of been slightly behind his grade level for a while. But what we see is that slow progress that we look for. But I think there's something to that. You start a little behind, you may have to play catch up a little bit.
Yeah, the challenge in education, and it's like I mentioned before, and I've used this analogy multiple times, especially in my administrative career, is the idea of a school being like an assembly line. And the product, which I would say is the middle of what we call in statistics a normal distribution or a bell curve, the
Right.
middle is going to be moving along. That assembly line is moving along at the pace of the middle.
Gotcha.
And the gifted students you mentioned are able to race ahead, or they can race ahead. And if you don't, they're going to get bored and cause problems in the classroom.
Right.
And some are just moving a little slower along that line.
Right.
One of our problems is that we put people in large schools. I mean, when I went to Lee High School, my graduating class had 636 students.
Wow.
Well,
Yeah.
that's about the size of now. It was larger when I headed it, but it's about the size of the school I headed, which was K3 through the 12th grade.
Right.
That was just a 12th grade class. That's who sat in the folding chairs at Garrett Coliseum on the night we graduated. It took forever, but 636 of us to walk across the stage. And how do you craft an educational program for 606 seniors? Through they're moving at different paces. They come from different homes. I mean, I came from a home filled with books. I could just walk to the bookshelf and pull a book off the shelf. A lot of kids don't have that, and so the home environment, there's so much that plays into it. It's very, very difficult for the education system and for teachers to corral those students and meet their needs. If you really got down to it, probably the best method there is an apprenticeship and a one-on-one type of situation.
Right.
And that's not very practical in this day and time. So it's a huge challenge for us. I think the key, what you're doing here, what people like Carol Dweck, do when they write their books and whatnot, is try to help as many people understand, especially people who stand in the classroom and teach. And we try to do that at Troy, where we're constantly reminding them that the way you make that student feel about himself or herself is going to make a tremendous difference in how they turn out, and make sure they know this research and understand it. And I think it's getting better. I really do.
Sure.
But we still have a ways to go.
Yeah. Well, it's a knowledge, and talking about it is how you start. That's the start of the conversation. So, well, it's fascinating to me, and watching you kind of come up and then go back and get your master's and then go back and get a PhD has been an inspiring story, because I was there the afternoon when Mom came home and said he is going to college.
That's right.
And I've always thought, I've never talked to you about, but I've always thought that might have been a turning point for you in the belief. Your mom really believed in you. So well, I appreciate you taking the time to talk with me. Is there a way people can follow along with you, or you're the dean of the College of Education. I know you guys have online education, distance learning. Don't you guys have distance learning?
We do. We were a pioneer in distance learning. We started that as soon as the internet was up and running, just about.
Yeah, I got on. Yeah.
Mid to late
Uh,
90s, we were an early adopter. Our primary purpose for doing that back then was to provide a service to the military,
oh,
active duty
wow.
military. Active duty military and their immediate dependents and veterans make up 20% of our student population.
Wow.
We have
Wow.
about
I didn't know that.
50,000 students. Yes, so we're a very military friendly university, and that's why we got into the online. But our website is troy.edu. It's very simple. And my email address is kjpalmer@troy.edu. So
Okay.
we're pretty easy to get a hold of. And Troy started off as a teachers college, and it's a relatively small. I'm on our main campus here in Troy. We have about 7,000 students. Yet we compete in Division I athletics and that
Wow.
kind of. So we have all the stuff big schools have, but we do try to provide that individual attention to students,
Sure.
and we're a very accessible university. I mean, we have in mind the first generation student,
Right.
someone whose family didn't go to college.
Gotcha.
So
Okay. That's great. Well, thank you so much for taking the time. I enjoyed it.
yeah, my
All right.
pleasure.